This video lecture is meant to clarify what we are looking for when completing one of the ACT project passages. The first thing I want you to recognize is what kind of a passage it is. And if you take a look here, we see Experiment 1, Experiment 2, and if we look at the next page, Experiment 3. And you'll see there's some data tables and some figures. And if I go ahead and look at the page of the summary of the reflection, when you see Experiment 1, Experiment 2, Experiment 3, etc. with data tables, then you know it's going to be the research summary. So we'll get good at recognizing the different passages as we work through this ACT project this semester. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that you've already taken the passage and you've already corrected your work, and you are now ready to do the reflection piece of this. Question number 3 asked you to write a brief summary of the passage or describe the connection to what you are learning in class. So you can either summarize the passage, or if it's easier, makes more sense to you, you can make the connection to what topics you saw in this passage connected to what we are doing in class. What I really need to help clarify for you is this page, which is meant for you to explain what you had to do to answer the question correctly. And by that, I mean, where did you have to go in the passage to get the answer, and what did you have to do when you got there? So we're going to work through this passage and to show you what we're looking for, because I think there may be some confusion. So to do this, we're going to have to look at each question and see where to find that information in the passage. The first question, number 22, asks, why might the actual mass collected in Experiment 1 be higher than the expected mass? So it leads you to believe that we need to go and read this Experiment 1. But upon closer inspection, that we see that the actual answer for this question is down here. This is a distillation experiment where water is boiled off here through the condenser, and then the water condenses back down here, and then what's left behind is the silver chloride and any impurities, and that right there is what that question is referring to, of why the actual mass might be heavier. So what I'm looking for in the reflection is for you to tell me that you went and read Experiment 1, the last part of that. So in this reflection page here, what I'm asking you to actually write down is that you had to read the last part of experiment number 1. That's it. That's all we were looking for. Didn't need an explanation of the science, just where did you get the information from and what you had to do when you got there. So you went to Experiment 1 and you had to read the last part. For question number 23, it says, if Experiment 2 is run again, what volume of water is likely to be collected if the expected volume is 90 milliliters? So what we are looking here is experiment number 2 right here. If it's run again, what volume of water is likely? So the expected volume was 18 in the experiment. The actual was 17.7. So if we set this up as a simple proportion, 17.7 was the actual divided by the expected of 18. If the expected volume is 90, essentially you're solving for x. Now you can't use a calculator, but you might be able to deduce that the closest answer, since 17.7 is very close to 18, that the answer here is going to be very close to 90. So 88 milliliters is the best answer. So what did we have to do to get this answer? We had to read Table 1. Specifically, we had to look at experiment number 2's data in Table 1, and then we had to do a simple proportion. So what we're going to write in our reflection page is that we look at experiment number 2 in Table 1 and do a simple proportion. Question 24 asks why might the actual mass collected in experiments 2 and 3 be lower than the expected mass, even though the reaction progressed to completion? Well, if we look at both experiments 2 and 3, what's common is that the student poured the contents of the test tube onto the filter paper. So this sentence right here also is the same sentence right here. So the idea that when you transfer the contents from one container to another, there's going to be some lost in that transfer. And so that's why experiment or choice G is the best answer. So in the reflection for question number 24, we had to read experiment 2 and 3, and we had to look for the common technique. Question number 25 asks, after reacting hydrochloric acid and silver hydroxide, but before separating the liquid and the solid products, each of the students was likely to see a mixture of both solid and liquid. To answer that question, we have to go back and look at the introductory paragraph. In green here, you can see that it says silver chloride is a solid that precipitates out of solution as it is formed. So the solid that precipitates out of the liquid means that that's what you're going to see. You're going to see both a solid and a liquid together. So in our reflection page, question number 25, you are going to say that you had to read the intro paragraph. And you had to find the answer there. You just had to read the intro paragraph. Question 26 reads, if experiment 1 is continued for 10 minutes after all the water has been collected in the conical flask, the student observes that the material in the round bottom flask turns a purple color. This effect could be most reasonably due to... If we look at the diagram in experiment number 1, we see that there is heat or a flame here, which causes any water in this round bottom flask to come through the condenser and then end up in this conical flask. And what that does is it leaves the solids left behind here without any water. So the fact is that any solids left in here is going to react with the flame heat and possibly have another chemical reaction. So let's take a look and see what we need to put into our reflection page. For question number 26, we had to read experiment number 1. And we had to look at figure 1. Question 27 is asking you to look at table 1 and look at the majority of experiments. The amount of product collected was, and you had to basically compare that to the amount of product expected every time. So if we go ahead and take a look at table 1, if we take a look at the actual mass here of 145 and the expected mass of 143, in the second experiment the actual mass was 134 compared to the expected of 143, so it was less. And then in the third experiment the actual mass was also less. So the majority means 2 out of the 3. So that's why our answer works there. So what did we have to do? We had to look at table 1 and we had to compare the actual mass to the expected mass. And then I'm going to write off this side for all 3 experiments. Question 28 is pretty straightforward. The only piece of equipment that all 3 experiments used were the conical flask here as the answer. But if we go ahead and take a look at that, each diagram, let's take a look. If we look at figure number 1, we see the conical flask. Figure number 2, we see the conical flask. And then if we look at experiment number 3, we also see that. So in order to answer this question correctly, we had to compare figures 1, 2, and 3 to look for the similarities. Hopefully this exercise has sort of helped you clarify any confusions you had with this. We're really looking for simpler responses, not in-depth responses. Really looking for you to tell us how you harvested that information, kind of stepping away from the content. Don't forget to give yourself a little pep talk. What would you do next time to get you through the passage faster and with better answers? See what you can do with that, and hope this helps. All right, thanks for listening all the way till now. See you in the classroom.